Hello everyone and welcome to Background Interview. I am Lily, and I am thrilled to have you here for a remarkable session of discovery and conversation. This channel aims to enrich your day, whether you are commuting, making breakfast, tidying up the house, or simply seeking a comforting voice in the background. We delve into culture, philosophy, art, history, and personal growth, all woven into an entertaining talk show format that you can enjoy as you go about your life. Today, we will explore the world of Alexandre Dumas, a literary figure who has contributed one of the most beloved French novels of the 19th century, The Lady of the Camellias. But before we dive into our riveting exchange with him, I would just like to share a little anecdote from my morning. I woke up bright and early, ran to prepare my coffee, and almost watered my plants with my freshly brewed coffee instead of using water. Well, I guess my mind was adrift in too many tasks at once. When I realized I was holding a steaming mug over my poor fern, I had to laugh at myself and step back. Life is nothing if not funny sometimes, right? Yes, we have to find humor in these small everyday mishaps that remind us of our humanity. Anyways, so, let me properly open the stage for our amazing guest, a name that has been spoken and revered by countless readers for generations. He bears the surname Dumas, a family name that echoes through literary history. Everyone, please join me in welcoming the one, the only, the extraordinary novelist and playwright, recognized for his significant works and especially for The Lady of the Camellias. It is my honor to present Alexandre Dumas. Give him a great round of applause as he makes his way to the stage.
Greetings to all. I thank you very much for this warm welcome and for your presence. I feel a genuine sense of anticipation, seeing how you have all come here with open hearts and curious minds. It is my pleasure to stand before you as a voice echoing from another era, ready to share my experiences, my thoughts, and perhaps a little wisdom that I have gathered along the way. Thank you for inviting me, Lily.
Let us both take our seats now. Please make yourself comfortable. We have much to discuss, and I cannot wait to begin. Alexander, may I ask you first to introduce yourself in your own words so that everyone here can have a full sense of who you are and the paths you have traveled in your life?
Certainly. I am known as Alexandre Dumas, born in 1824 in Paris, son of the celebrated author Alexandre Dumas who gave the world The Count of Monte Cristo and The Three Musketeers. I inherited his literary passion, though my style differs, focusing on social and moral themes rather than the grand adventure sagas my father favored. I had a complex childhood shaped by social expectations, class prejudices, and the constant weight of my father's reputation. Over time, I developed my own voice and went on to write essays and plays in addition to novels. My most famous work, The Lady of the Camellias, or La Dame aux Camellias, examined love, sacrifice, and society's ironies with an intimacy that many readers found compelling. My life has been a journey of embracing a heritage while forging my own identity, and I hope our conversation today will shed light on some of the personal struggles, joys, and epiphanies that shaped my writing.
That introduction speaks volumes. There is a delightful paradox in being both the heir to a prodigious literary name and an artist yearning to shine in a unique way. Before we dig deeper into your history, I have a small humorous tidbit I would like to share. There is a story floating around that, at one point, you might have attended a large social gathering in two entirely different shoes. Is that true? Our audience is always hungry for a little laugh, and it is a charming anecdote I could not resist bringing up.
I blush at the mention of that memory. Indeed, there was a time in my youth when I found myself in so much haste and disarray that I marched onto the parquet floor of a grand salon wearing mismatched shoes. One was meticulously polished, the other was rather scuffed, and a few discerning guests noticed it right away. Their bemused stares gave me a lesson in humility. From that day onward, I vowed never to rush out the door without carefully checking what I was wearing. One cannot underestimate the comic potential of daily life, it seems.
What a cute story. Now, let us begin our grand exploration. Alexander, could you talk to us about your upbringing? Born into an environment that I imagine was filled with both literary innovation and also societal pressures, how did that shape your early perspective on life?
My upbringing was never simple. On one hand, my father was a beloved cultural figure, courted by publishers, critics, and the aristocracy. On the other, I was born out of wedlock in a society that took the matter of birth status very seriously. Even as I carried the Dumas name, I was sometimes made to feel like an outsider. This tension fostered in me a sensitivity to issues of social judgment and moral double standards. From an early age, I sensed that, behind the elegance of Parisian life, lay invisible barriers and unspoken codes. My mother faced her own difficulties, and I felt protective towards her. Meanwhile, I observed the ephemeral nature of success. One moment, you are on top of the literary world, the next moment you might become the subject of scandal. So in essence, I grew up with a desire to explore the conflict between public persona and private suffering, between surface appearances and deeper truths. That tension eventually guided me towards the writing desk, where I found the freedom to dissect society's facades and reveal the vulnerabilities beneath.
That is truly insightful. Did this inclination lead you to develop a habit of writing at a young age? Or did you initially see your father and think you wanted to do something entirely different so as not to be overshadowed by him?
It was a mixture of both. On one hand, I was intrigued by my father's creative energy, which seemed endless. I would see him scribbling away at all hours, conjuring stories, bringing characters to life. It was inspiring, but intimidating as well, because his shadow loomed so large. I ventured to keep journals in my adolescence, reflecting on incidents in the household, my impressions of guests, and my own emotional struggles. Slowly, those private writings matured into short stories and moral reflections. By the time I was a young adult, I knew I had to address deeper themes than mere adventure. I felt compelled to illustrate the moral, social, and psychological aspects of life, believing that a novel should hold a mirror to society's soul. Over time, that belief crystallized into my first major works, culminating in The Lady of the Camellias, which took a more intimate and heartbreaking approach than the epic narratives my father was famous for.
Let us speak about The Lady of the Camellias in detail now. Many of us know the gist of the story, but I would love if you could give our listeners an in-depth summary and your own interpretation of why it has remained such a timeless piece of literature. What themes in it resonate so powerfully even today?
The Lady of the Camellias is at heart a story of deep and transcendent love, set against the limitations of a rigid social environment. It revolves around Marguerite Gautier, a courtesan who is both admired for her beauty and condemned by moralistic onlookers. Her fragile health, manifested by consumption, mirrors her precarious social position. She meets Armand Duval, a relatively naive but sincere young man who falls passionately in love with her. Their romance unfolds under the constant threat of judgment from those who see Marguerite as nothing more than a tainted figure unworthy of respect. As their intimacy grows, she attempts to shield him from the harsh realities of her life, while he grapples with jealousy and despair over not fully possessing her affections or freeing her from her financial entanglements. When Armand's father intervenes, imploring Marguerite to step aside for the sake of the Duval family's respectability, a tragic moral conflict arises. Marguerite's decision to sacrifice her own happiness for Armand's social future leads to heartbreak and regret. Ultimately, Marguerite dies, leaving Armand with a profound understanding of her love and her predicament only too late. Readers continue to find resonance in the way the novel exposes hypocrisy, explores the complexities of love, and presents a heroine who fights to preserve her dignity in a hostile world. Her devotion and self-sacrifice become a poignant reminder of how quickly genuine love can be crushed under the weight of public opinion. Through her fate, I aim to underscore how moral cruelty can do more damage than any personal failing of character. That universal theme, I believe, is part of why the novel remains relevant. People still judge, society still stigmatizes, and the human heart still yearns for acceptance and understanding.
You mentioned that Marguerite was partly inspired by a real person you knew. Do you care to elaborate on that? Without intruding on your personal life, I wonder how much of this novel was shaped by first-hand experiences.
Her real-life counterpart was Marie Duplessis, an extraordinary woman I met when I was a young man searching for meaningful connection. She stood out among the Parisian demi-mondaine for her intelligence, grace, and sense of compassion. Yet, behind the apparent glamour, she was vulnerable to the same societal censure that any courtesan would endure. Observing her delicate balance between fulfilling the demands of her patrons and chasing a semblance of personal happiness sparked in me a desire to represent her story in fictional form. When she passed away, I found myself carrying a heavy weight of sorrow. Transforming that grief into art was both cathartic and illuminating. While Marguerite Gautier is not a word-for-word portrait of Marie Duplessis, many elements, her grace, her ailing health, her moral complexity, stem from that reality. The novel became a tribute, an effort to show that, behind the label of courtesan or fallen woman, resides a fully formed human soul deserving empathy and love.
What about the audience's response back in your day? Were people scandalized by a novel that sympathized so openly with a courtesan? Or did they embrace it with immediate admiration?
Reactions were certainly mixed at first. Conservative circles disapproved, claiming I was glamorizing immorality and tainting literature with lurid subject matter. However, many readers, including quite a few women, found Marguerite's portrayal refreshing and deeply human. They recognized the societal critique at the heart of the book, seeing how it indicted a world that both desires and condemns women in Marguerite's position. Gradually, the novel gained momentum, so much so that it was adapted into a play, which drew even larger audiences. Eventually, it transcended the controversies and established itself as a cultural touchstone. The emotional honesty was precisely what resonated with people who themselves might have felt judged or constrained by societal norms, albeit to a lesser extent. Within a few years, The Lady of the Camellias became a phenomenon, even influencing works like Verdi's La Traviata. The widespread acknowledgement proved to me that authentic emotional expression, even if it shocks at first, can open minds and hearts in a lasting way.
It certainly has endured, spawning multiple adaptations, plays, operas, and film versions. I find that remarkable, especially considering how personal the story was. Now, I want to ask you, was there a particular passage or scene in the novel that you found especially excruciating or challenging to write? Perhaps a moment where you had to wrestle with your own memories in order to do justice to the emotions involved?
Yes, it was the depiction of Marguerite's final days. That section demanded I confront my own grief, regrets, and the universal unfairness of losing someone too soon. Despite knowing how the novel would end, actually writing those pages was like reopening a wound. It was agonizing to illustrate her weakness, her sense of hopelessness, and the regrets she had about her choices, while maintaining the dignity that defined her character. I hope that readers would feel both heartbreak and an urge to reflect on how society compels such tragic outcomes. There were times I had to stop writing and step away just to gather my emotional composure. It is the kind of creative labor that exacts a toll on the heart, but it also lends authenticity to the final work.
Thank you for sharing that. It is humbling to realize how much of an author's spirit can be poured into a narrative. Before we move forward, we are going to take some audience questions. But first, we have some curious emails that were sent in by listeners who could not be here physically. We will begin with those. Are you ready for this new corner of the show where we connect with our remote audience? Our first email is from Anna in Boston. She says, "Dear Mr. Dumas, I have always wondered how much of your father's influence shaped The Lady of the Camellias. Did you worry he would disapprove of your focus on a courtesan's life, or did he support you wholeheartedly? That is such an interesting question. What is your response, Alexander?"
Thank you for relaying Anna's question. My father and I did differ in our approaches to storytelling. He was known for sweeping action, romantic heroes, and an unflagging sense of grandeur. In contrast, I was concerned with moral dilemmas and social commentary. However, he did not disapprove of my topic. In fact, he believed in the power of love stories that shine a light on societal hypocrisy. While he might have teased me for being too serious at times, he saw that my earnestness could touch a readership that wanted more than just escapism. I do recall moments of tension, such as when he suggested I add more dramatic flair or comedic relief. I resisted in order to preserve the emotional integrity I wanted to convey. Ultimately, he respected my determination, and he recognized that all writers must follow the compass of their own convictions.
I love that. Thank you for that thoughtful answer. Anna, I hope this satisfies your curiosity. Our second email is from Julius in Chicago, who asks, "Your play and the subsequent opera adaptations introduced your story to vast numbers of people. How did you feel when you first saw The Lady of the Camellias transformed on the stage or heard it reimagined as La Traviata by Verdi? Did it feel like your personal tale was no longer your own, or was it a source of pride?"
A bit of both. Seeing the novel adapted for the stage was an awe-inspiring moment, yet it also filled me with trepidation. Suddenly, the characters and plot I had so delicately nurtured were being interpreted by directors, actors, and eventually a legendary composer. I worried that the emotional nuances might be lost or overshadowed by the spectacle of performance. However, I soon realized that each adaptation brought new facets to the story. The public connected with Marguerite and Armand even more powerfully when they saw living actors embody them, or heard the heartbreak expressed in operatic arias. Over time, I learned to see these adaptations not as theft, but as expansions that allowed the original vision to resonate across different art forms. Ultimately, it was a source of pride, because it confirmed the universal appeal of what began as my own personal heartbreak and reflection on moral injustice.
Thank you, that is a marvelous perspective on artistic adaptation. The third email is from Clarissa in Sydney, who writes, "In The Lady of the Camellias, you challenge the moral judgments placed upon courtesans. Do you think modern society has changed enough so that such stigma would no longer be as sharp, or do you see parallels to present-day condemnations of certain lifestyles?" That is quite a contemporary-minded query, I must say.
Modern society has undoubtedly made significant strides in recognizing personal autonomy. However, the phenomenon of stigma simply adapts to new contexts. While courtesans might not exist in the same form, issues of class, sexuality, and moral policing continue in various guises. People still face condemnation and shame for choices that run counter to mainstream norms. The basic human tendency to judge remains quite resilient. That is why I believe the novel still holds relevance. It is a reminder that, behind every label, lies a real person with hopes, fears, and complexities. We may have updated our vocabulary and social frameworks, but the fundamental question of empathy remains as urgent as ever.
Thank you for that, Alexander. Clarissa, I trust this has given you a thoughtful answer. Now, dear audience, are you ready to jump in with your own questions about the life and works of Alexandre Dumas? I see a hand raised in the front row. You, the gentleman with the burgundy jacket. May I have your name and your question? Yes, of course. Right, so you are Henry, from a nearby town. Henry would like to know how you coped with criticism from social elites who might have frowned upon the subject matter of your novel, and whether such disapproval ever made you reconsider your writing altogether.
I appreciate that question, Henry. The social elite were quick to pass judgment, especially since many of them were implicated in the very behaviors and double standards I examined. Yet, ironically, it was often those who had the most to hide who spoke loudest against me, accusing the book of scandal. There were moments when I felt discouraged. Reputation could be ruined in an instant, and patronage withdrawn if one angered the wrong individuals. However, I reminded myself that writing is not about appeasing those in power. It is about unveiling truths that might otherwise remain suppressed. That conviction strengthened my resolve. In the end, I chose to stand by my story. The satisfaction of knowing I had been faithful to my own moral and artistic compass outweighed the fear of ostracism.
Thank you, Henry, for that insightful prompt. Who else from our wonderful crowd would like to pose a question? I see a lady on the right side waving her notebook. Yes, I will come right over. Your name is Marianne, from across the country. Marianne asks if you ever felt overshadowed by the immense fame of your father and whether that created any personal friction or self-doubt as you established your career. That is a question many of us wonder about, I must admit.
Thank you, Marianne. It is a valid question, and the simple answer is yes, of course. I spent many of my youth-filled days wrestling with the possibility that I would always be known as the Lesser Dumas. I adored my father but also struggled with the reality that he was unstoppable, writing colossal works that entranced entire generations. Nevertheless, that very sense of being overshadowed forced me to search for my unique voice. It pushed me to be unafraid of controversial subject matter and to speak frankly about moral complexities. In a way, my father's towering presence ultimately helped me grow into a more daring writer. While there was some internal friction initially, I came to see that our separate contributions could coexist in the literary realm, and that my authenticity did not hinge on surpassing him but on being true to my own themes and style.
Beautifully put. We have time for one last question from the audience. Yes, I see another hand in the back. I will navigate my way there. You are wearing a striking green scarf. Okay, hello. Your name is? And your question? Right, I see. Got it. Okay, you are Harriet, from a nearby college, and your question is: did you ever think about giving the novel a less tragic ending or having Marguerite find some measure of redemption or happiness rather than the sorrowful conclusion we all know?
Harriet, that is a question I have asked myself in many midnight hours. The short answer is that the story demanded its own ending. A sanitized resolution would have undermined the indictment of society's cruelty I set out to present. Marguerite's demise is symbolic of how quickly a person can be destroyed once society decides to cast them aside. Tragedy illuminates the cost of moral hypocrisy and forces the reader to contemplate what might have been if empathy, not judgment, had prevailed. A happy ending might have offered temporary comfort, but it would have left the deeper issue unresolved.
Thank you, Harriet, for that question, and thank you all for this lively discussion. Let us give a heartfelt round of applause for everyone's participation, especially to Alexander, of course.
I suppose. I feel very grateful for all these engaging questions. It renews my sense of connection to audiences across time. Thank you for hosting this, Lily, and to everyone here for contributing to such an energetic and meaningful session.
Let us keep going. Now, I have a few personal curiosities that are more whimsical in nature. If you suddenly found yourself transplanted into today's modern world, with all its gadgets, social media, and changing values, how do you think you would respond to it all? Would you still take up the pen or perhaps choose a different path entirely?
My inclination is that I would still choose to write, for the human heart remains the same even as technology evolves. Whether by hand or on a digital screen, the compulsion to narrate emotional truths would guide me. I might be fascinated by the new channels through which stories can be shared, perhaps through film, streaming platforms, or interactive formats. I would likely explore topics such as online anonymity, the speed of moral outrage on social networks, and the ways in which fleeting judgments can ruin a person's standing. Ultimately, I imagine I would remain a commentator on human frailty and resilience, albeit shaped by the developments of the modern age.
That is wonderful to imagine. Another whimsical idea. If you could meet modern audiences face to face, what do you suppose you would tell them about your life's greatest lesson? Would it be about love? Would it be about standing up to societal hypocrisy? Or perhaps something more nuanced?
I suppose I would emphasize that genuine love, when guided by empathy and mutual respect, is the most transformative force. At the same time, I would caution them about how quickly we all can lapse into prejudice. It has not disappeared merely because laws have changed or technology has advanced. My writings arose from a desire to challenge superficial distinctions and remind people that, behind every dismissed or stigmatized individual, stands a soul capable of selfless devotion, just as Marguerite demonstrated. So, yes, love and empathy would be my greatest lesson, tempered by a practical warning that we have not yet eradicated the seeds of moral cruelty that echo through every generation.
A timeless message for sure. Now, looking back on your life, from your childhood overshadowed by an illustrious father, to your personal heartbreaks and the creation of the Lady of the Camellias, what do you see as the biggest turning point that set you on your definitive path?
I would identify my encounter with the real woman who became the basis for Marguerite as that turning point. Her passing shook me, and I found myself consumed by regret and a profound sense of injustice. Channeling that sorrow into a work of literature crystallized my understanding of my own mission, that is, to tell stories that might inspire empathy where judgment often prevails. Once I completed that novel, I never looked back. It was then that I fully embraced my role not just as a storyteller, but as a moral commentator. Everything else in my life, from the praise to the controversies, followed from that pivotal act of creative mourning.
Thank you for that heartfelt honesty. Before we shift toward our closing segment, I want to give you the opportunity to share a final piece of wisdom with our audience. Is there a particular sentiment you wish to leave them with that might kindle reflection long after this program has ended?
Certainly, I would say, do not underestimate the capacity of a single sincere act of kindness or compassion to alter another person's trajectory. My novel highlights how damaging it is to act based on superficial judgments. Consider that, behind each face you encounter, lies an entire universe of feelings, struggles, and dreams. If the Lady of the Camellias has endured, perhaps it is partly because it resonates with our longing to be seen for who we truly are, rather than through the distorted lens of societal biases. I encourage everyone, whenever possible, to pause and ask whether they are withholding empathy from someone who desperately needs it.
Thank you so very much. Now, friends, let us offer a warm round of applause for the wisdom and presence of Alexandre Dumas.
Your gratitude warms my heart. Thank you, Lily, for the chance to speak to an audience so eager and attentive. I will now bid you farewell, with the hope that my words have offered some measure of understanding or inspiration. May you all walk away with a renewed sense of compassion.
Thank you again, Mr. Dumas. Let us keep the applause going for him as he steps away from the stage. He has taken us on a journey through time and emotion, and we are immensely grateful. I want to thank everyone here, both in the audience and listening from wherever you might be, for tuning in to Background Interview. Remember, your support is priceless to us, so do not forget to subscribe, leave a like, share comments, and encourage others to listen as well. This show is designed to be your companion in the car, at home, during a break, or before bed. We have episodes in multiple languages, so if you ever crave a different linguistic experience or wish to practice your French or Japanese, you can find various versions of these discussions. Personally, I think it is great fun to go back to an episode one missed a chunk of because, well, maybe my mind was wandering. No worries, because you can always replay it and pick up new insights. My heartfelt thanks to all of you. Sometimes, people say they listen to our show as if it were a lullaby at night. I say, if our voices lull you to dreamland, that is a fantastic compliment. After all, a peaceful sleep is truly priceless. So let this program serve as your personal storybook as well. And if you are wide awake and raring to go, then let it be your energizing background track. Either way, we are here for you. On that note, let us wrap up for today. Thank you for being the best audience a show could ask for. Take care of yourselves, stay curious, and come back soon for another enlightening conversation on Background Interview. Until next time, keep your spirits bright and never stop exploring the world around you. This is Lily signing off.